Okay, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Kola Tubosun. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to this interesting conversation about language and translation and literature, something subject that interests me a lot. And I've had conversations with people about over different over different instances, spaces. Today we have about 6 panelists to have this conversation with. Professor Adeeko, Mr. Tade, Ipadeola, Aisha, Adamu, Amarachi, Atammah. Amarachi, I can't see. I don't know if she's here yet. Richard and Mubashir Abdullah here as well. I don't know if he's here. So what I want to do is, instead of having to read everyone's bio, which will take forever, I want to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves, tell us what you do, why you're here, and how your work relates to this conversation about translation and languages. So I will start with Professor Adeeko. The order I see on my screen here. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, 2?
Yeah, I'll take your time. Yeah, just
introduce.
Yes.
Okay, I won't take 2 minutes. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for allowing me to participate in this. My name is Adeleke Adeeko, originally Nigerian, as they say in the US. But I teach, I'm a professor in the English department at Ohio State University in Columbus. And just about 2 months ago, I started as interim chair of African American and African Studies at Ohio State here. I write about Yoruba culture and literature, Anglophone literature and culture, particularly post-1945. And I also study African American poetry since 1865 till now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're welcome, and good evening to you from Lagos.
Thank you.
Richard, you go next.
Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Richard Ali. I'm a poet and a novelist, and I co-founded Parisia Publishers. I've been fascinated by translations for quite a while, and at the Abu Dhabi Book Festival, that was 4 years ago, I spoke of Arabic as a bridge between the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, relying on, of course, traditions of communications in Arabic between northern Nigeria and parts of Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. Recently, I worked on Professor David Cooperson's translation of Al-Hariri's Makamats into various Englishes, and I did the translation for Pidgin English for that particular publication. I work with Jalada. I'm the board secretary at Jalada, and Jalada is one of the most prominent digital publishers on the continent at present. And we have an edition on translation, which I also worked on, which would definitely come into the conversation.
Thank you, Richard. We'll go to Wanjeri in East Africa.
Yeah, good evening from Nairobi. My name is Wanjeri Gakuru. I am the managing editor of Jalada Africa, which is a Pan-African Writers Collective, which Richard Ali has just mentioned. So my particular participation today is regarding our translation issue, which we have currently 94 languages from a fable originally written in Gikuyu by Professor Ngoge Wathiongo. And I am excited to listen to everybody today.
Karibu. Next, we have Mr. Tade Ipadeola, who seems to be in the dark. Can't see his face.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Tade Ipadeola. I write and I try to translate. I'm working currently on Pagua again. I've done some translation of poetry by Auden, some translation by Thomas Trummer. I'm interested in false friends in translations. all spent, as you know, are words that seem to serve but don't quite serve in the whole process of translation. Thank you. I'm in Nigeria. I'm in Lagos now.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have, I think this is all the panelists we have, but since I have Egosa here, I might as well just, oh, Aisha is there. Egosa, I'm going to conscript you into the panel, so you can escape, you're already here. So I want to tell me a little bit about yourself and about your work in, that relates to language or your interest.
Pardon? You are going to conscript me to it?
Yeah, so you're already part of us, so you go talk.
Okay, man.
You're there, you go talk. Yes, go on.
Doctor, I know, my name is Dr. Egosa Imaswen, originally medical doctor, now writer and publisher. I'm a co-founder and director at Narrative Landscape Press. My own writing tries to bridge the idea of several types of English, or the many Englishes, specifically the one that is native to me, which is Pidgin English, since I grew up in Warri. I think that's the closest I have to translation. I'm one of the, I'm an example of one of the tragedies and also one of the opportunities of multiculturalism, in that I speak two Nigerian languages, English and Pidgin English. And I believe that writing in both of them is important. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Aisha, I see you there, so please give us a little introduction about yourself and your work. You have to unmute yourself first. I can't hear you. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Aisha Umar Adamu. I have a PhD in linguistics. So I work at Aminu Kano College of Islamic and Legal Studies. I've been teaching translation for a while now. Apart from teaching translation, I did some work. I remember a thesis on translation, that is word formation in Hausa translating. So I'm still doing some works on translation. Currently, I'm working on translating nonverbal communication. That's my current work on translation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for being here, and many of the others in the audience. So when we're talking about setting up this panel, Jaman and I, one of the things I have been thinking about for a long time is why translation is not a big deal in Nigerian publishing. When we think of notable works that have been translated, just like 2 or 3 come to mind. The Shoyinka one, the one Akim Mishala did of Shoyinka's work into Yoruba. The Shoyinka's translation of Fagunwa's book was called The Forest of a Thousand Demons. And a number of translations that didn't happen, like Things Fall Apart into Igbo, for instance. I'm curious, and one of the things I want to find out, first of all, to kick the conversation forward, is what exactly, how do you personally, from your work and your interaction, see the environment of translation in Nigeria, Nigerian creative works, the interaction with Nigerian literary work with translation, or your own personal experience, either positively or negatively? If each of you can speak to that in like 2 to 3 minutes. Let's start with, well, I said Nigeria. Well, I mean generally now because Wanjeri is here, so I'm not going to exclude you. So Wanjeri, let me start with you. You have done some work at Jalada with Ngugi wa Thiong'o's work translated into about 90 languages, you said. But it seems to be one of the rarest instances we found of an African work being translated in so many languages. So what was the environment like before you started, and how do you think your work has impacted the space?
Well, first and foremost, I must give mention to Moses Kilolo, who is the project conceptualizer, and he's currently the project lead. And what happened with this particular issue is that we had published a language issue, And we had received stories that were not in English. We had received stories that were in Luya, they were in French. I believe this is the issue where Richard Ali wrote about Arabic being the bridge between these two worlds. And it really inspired us to push forward and find what else could we do. And so when we approached Professor Ngozi Thiong'o and he gave us this fable, which he had written actually as a gift to his granddaughter, just within his family, and just didn't know where it could go in the world. This writer of such repute had a story in Gikuyu that did not go anywhere. And he gave it to us, and he wrote it in Gikuyu originally, then translated it into English. And once we put the call out for translations, within 3 months, we got 33 languages. And these 33 languages, majority were African languages. And what was exciting was that it wasn't just professional translators attacking this story. It was language enthusiasts, it was students, it was individuals working with their families. And so I think it's people just kind of need a provocation. They need an opportunity to do something. And I think the more these chances come up, the more this work will happen. And so in the 3-4 years since, things have kind of slowed down a little bit. But in that period, we got 60 more translations happening. And so for me, I feel like there's a hunger, there's a desire, and I think people just need an opportunity and a project that excites them. And hopefully this can continue on, this translation series.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Adeeko, since you as an academic and you have worked in this space, what has been your own experience looking at Nigeria, the past, like I said, 2 major translations into Yoruba, for instance. There's another one here. That's the things all about Yoruba. But very few. You can count them on one hand. What has happened and what's the solution to the problem? You are muted, so I can't hear you.
Thank you.
Thank
you. I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, we can hear you now, yes.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the situation for a very long time. At the level of profession, it's one of the major problems that Ngugi was the first person to highlight in modern times. The Ngugi wa Thiong'o that Wanjiru just referred to. And that brought that to the forefront for all of us. In Nigeria, it's even worse. That you will have, there is no monolingual speakers of Igbo cannot read things all apart in Igbo, whereas Russians can read it in the language. The remotest language, the remotest language in Asia, they could read things all apart in the native languages, or native in quote, and Igbo speakers cannot read. The same thing with Shoyinka, same thing with major writers in Nigeria. It's a problem, and I think it's a major problem of institutions. There used to be translation bureau in many African countries, at least that I know of. In Nigeria, for example, in southwestern Nigeria, old Ministry of Education, there were efforts to actually translate old books in other languages into Yoruba. Olani Pekun translated classics, Greek classics, into Yoruba, and not just adaptation like Olarochimi will do later. But after the experiment of Olani Pekun, nothing followed. It's unfortunate now, even with more contemporary writers. You mentioned only 2. I felt so bad that I started translating too. This summer, I did a translation of Femi Oshofison's first novella, first work of fiction published, Cholera College, 1975. Right. I translated to Yoruba. It's actually with a publisher in Ibadan now, weighing whether to publish or not. The publisher, just to refer to the problem, told me, look, nobody buys books in Yoruba. He told me that. He said it's very rare. He published a translation. Actually, he's the publisher of Ake in Yoruba. Ishola's translation of. He said the book didn't sell, even with Shoyinka's name. So he doesn't know whether he's going to take it or not. But he still has it on his hands.
Because I was going to say that if even though books don't typically, sell in local languages, one would have thought that having Shoyinka's name on it, and Akim Mishola, which are two prominent writers, would so what's the solution? How do we move forward?
It's a major reversal of what we have been doing before. It's a terrible reversal. It's tragic as far as I'm concerned in terms of the language ecology in Nigeria. If you want to enrich that place, to create a country, we need to be able to speak across with one another. Put Shoyinka in Yoruba, put Shoyinka in Igbo. If Shoyinka doesn't sell in Yoruba, how can he sell in Igbo or Hausa or Fulani?
Right.
He will sell in German. The irony is that Shoyinka will sell in German, but he will not sell in Yoruba or Hausa. Or Akan. We just have to put money and develop schools. Reading interest at the local level.
Okay. All right. So when I was at the British Library for a year last year, one of the books I found, some of the earlier books published in Yoruba apparently were translations of missionary texts. Of course, because there was a lot of money and a lot of interest in getting missionary texts in Yoruba. There were so many, and I don't know whether there were profit motives behind the movements to translate them, but at least there was an effort to do so, and they got a number of people to translate, from the Aesop fables to, all the, classical Oyinbo texts. Mr. Ipadeola, I want to bring you in and ask, you have done some translations yourself. Speak to this idea of getting the marketability, or should we just assume that at this stage we shouldn't bother about marketability and just do it because it's just important?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you though.
All right. I know I don't have the bandwidth.
Okay.
So first of all, I'd like to start by, referring to an interview that Gabriel Garcia Marquez granted. His English and his French were good enough for him to do translations from Spanish, and he never did. So the interviewer asked him why he never did. And he said that the reason was it doesn't pay. The effort that you need to put in is not remunerated. That is true in Nigeria. We have a lot of people who are competent to do it, but there is no reward for their efforts. That's one. Then two, and I think Professor Harry Garuba did mention this, in terms of the circuits of value that we've created, and I would say the pursuit of those circuits, there has been disproportionate allocation of energy and resources to the language of government, which is English, other than the language of the mother tongue that we use. So it's a policy thing, it's an institutional thing. There are enough schools to actually take up the production if we address the fundamental problems of production in the first place. The market is big enough. I think that if you have, and I think Nigeria has 250 ethnic nationalities. If you have a policy that says that each child will be educated in the mother tongue, then we'll have something that we can start working with. But because there is no strong policy framework and there is no pursuit of these things, we've not had any traction. I think it can be reversed, but we have to make an effort to have it reversed. I think those who do this work, like Professor Adeeko, I know Adeeko has one in the works. They are the true heroes of this effort to revive. I have tried to do my translation. I never had an eye on the market to start with. I'm going to speak, if you allow me later on, about some of the mistakes I think some of our translators are making. Because I can even broach it now. I got the son of Fagunwa to give me a go ahead. I never drew up an MOU. I forgot that the man himself was not a young man anymore, and he died. So I have a book translated that I cannot publish because I know it will be infringing copyright. Anyway, I have to allow other speakers to speak.
Thank you.
From my point of view, that's what it is.
Okay. Egosa, you are a publisher, and besides your opinion on the language situation in Nigeria, which I also know you have opinions on, I mean, you work in Nigerian English and Pidgin. what would you say is the way? I mean, we talk about these problems all the time. The problem of
we actually fight about them all the time.
We fight about this all the time. Publishers say there's no readers, so we're not going to put money in where nobody is going to buy. Writers say, you know, there used to be readers, and we used to have a thriving industry, and people used to buy. So who gets to be the first person to bail the cat before so things start to happen? So as a publisher, what has been your own experience?
For us, right now, we are tentatively, I think this is the first time to be heard publicly, tentatively working on the Yoruba translation for My Sister the Serial Killer. And the first person on our list to translate is our able host. So you will get an email soon. I just discuss it for public with that. But in that sense, we're actually doing it as a niche project, as a niche, almost like a vanity project to a select group of people, almost like a collector's item, which is both instructive and also quite painful that it has to be that.
Yeah.
Now I'm Benin. I'm from Benin City, and other people need to mute their mic. Somebody needs to mute their microphone.
I will find it first and mute them. Don't worry.
Okay. So we are trying. Our major issue is this. Like even Benin was the orthography for the language, which uses the Roman alphabet, was decided on, I think, about 80 or even 100 years ago. But how many Benin people are literate in Benin?
Does it have its own writing system?
Yes, it has its own writing system. Instead of the dashes, ours are dots below, and almost like the way the Igbos own are dots instead of the dashes. And instead of the but basically it's the same thing. A-E-I-O-U. Same thing. Only I think we have a lot of MWs and VBs and things like that. We have certain consonants that other languages don't have, and our Zs are a bit different. But it exists, and there are very few people who are very good speakers who can actually read in the language. So these are things that everybody already knows, but they have real practical implications for putting your money into that place. So how do you do it? There are many ways. You either get it sponsored or make the market happen by having like an arcade, like an arcade, which is based on a high value,
create an industry,
or having a niche work or having a niche work, and also working in a language that won the battle a long time ago. So Yoruba is vibrantly literate. So is Hausa. The Igbo thing is slightly more complicated in that nobody speaks the language that is written.
Right.
The language that is written is a portmanteau of about 6 different versions. Nobody speaks it. Although now, although a friend of mine who lives in this says that because people are learning to read it, that funny odd language is now being spoken. You know, writing tends to create its own thing. Right? That's the way writing works. That's like the English we speak, or like when you see ye hold tavern, people think that YE. YE was actually what we now call TH, the heavy TH. You know, so writing itself, what I always believe, last point, like I was trying to say, what I always believe is that every little bit helps. These conversations that we have help. The complaints that people like me have help about I can't put my money there. But eventually, money is like gravity. It will find its way there. If the need exists, it will happen organically, or it will happen by action taken by people who are fighting for it to happen. And among those things, like what Narrative Landscape is trying to do is that we're actually working across the colonial languages. So we're trying to get some of our works in translation in French so that I can spread across this bric-a-brac of countries that the Europeans left us with. So we're trying to work into Lusophone too, trying to get into the languages of education in those spaces, trying to find ways to filter the ideas into the population, while also being there as a support mechanism for any opportunity that comes in translation into the languages that are indigenous to this, into our languages, into the way we speak is important. And that's why I crack the joke I crack about speaking two Nigerian languages, English and Pidgin, because I believe that Nigerian English has become its own. And of course, if you're a Warri boy, what else do you call Pidgin English but your lingua franca? You know, but yeah, so that is what I sincerely believe, that the efforts are important. It will happen. We will accelerate it, but also that certain consequences also occur that are almost inevitable. We'll be fighting what we call a losing battle, but I don't think it's a losing battle. Things will happen. You can't say what they will be.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Aisha, as a professor of linguistics, I'm sure you have a lot of things to say, even from the perspective of how translations help in sustaining the languages themselves. Because then at the end of the day, it's not just a business, you're contributing to the survival of a language in the medium in which it didn't exist before for many African languages, the writing medium. You know, all our literatures used to be just oral and things we passed down and performed publicly. So what do you see as a landscape when you look at the Nigerian literary landscape? What do you see as from the perspective of somebody who studies the growth and development of languages?
Okay. Translation, it's all about every day we see new things, new inventions. Currently, like the COVID came, it was new. We didn't know it before. We have to address it. We have to name it with all the things involved. So we now live in a globalized world with over 7,000 languages. Translation is inescapable. When we come to the Nigerian space, there are many people involved in translation. We have the freelancers, we have the academics who do the intellectual translation and so on. We have the literary translation, terminology translation, different types of translation. So I see the translations taken over by the free have passion in translation, of translation. So translation doesn't only mean knowing the languages. There are other things involved. We have the techniques, we have technicalities involved in translations. So when I look at translations, maybe from the billboards, from the news you hear every day, you will see a lot of translation that needs some, what will I say, some kind of an expert touch. I don't mean that a freelancer should not translate. What I really do mean is that if you are passionate about translation, you should know the techniques involved in translating. The CAT, what we call the computer assisted tools, cannot be the only things that can qualify you, that you can rely on as a translator. So
if we move, if we focus on literary translation, I want to know whether you have any personal experience in translating literary works, for instance. And what have you seen has been the problem, especially in the language you speak? with people who translate, literary works, not just translation of like, documents and stuff like that, but like literature. Have you had any personal experience there? Aisha? I think her network is bad. Richard, I want you to step in here for a little bit. What has been your own personal experience in literary translation? And what do you see as a problem, especially within the Hausa language community? I don't know if Hausa is your first language, but I know you've done some work there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to maybe pick up a little bit from where Aisha stopped, which is the centrality of passion for translations. It also ties in with what Professor Adeeko has also said and what Tade Ipadeola has said, which is that at some point in time in Nigeria, particularly in today's Nigeria in the 2020s, translation is something that you do out of passion and out of what you say, fisabilillah, for the love of God. You're not really, you will not take the time and the effort to do a translation because you're going to sell copies of the books. Because the reality is that the market, as Ahosa has said, is very, very different. Now, when we look at it historically, all right, the need for translation was driven primarily by religion, particularly in northern Nigeria. We had the issue of Nigerian Bible translation trusts, where essentially it was, okay, how do we reach down to these people in their own languages? And there was an impetus, and quite a number of languages exist in written form because it was felt that it was necessary to get the Bible there. But the second wave, which is also just as important, I like to relate this as maybe the death of ideology in our societies, which is that when we look back at it, all right, most translation into indigenous languages were driven by leftists in the immediate post-colonial period, in the run-up to independence, and after that. People like Yusuf Bala Usman, people particularly say someone like Bonaventure Swai, who was Tanzanian, but he was based in Kano, and he wrote an excellent piece on the sociology of Africanist historiography, which argued for all these things. So it was these leftists, because they also, like the religious people, they believed that it was important to get as many people onto that, socialism or communism course. So there was an ideology for this thing, whether it's religious ideology or leftist ideology. The problem is that in today's Nigeria, there is no ideology about anything. We are not exactly capitalist. We are not traditional. We are not even bats. We are not owls. No one is quite sure. And it is into this uncertainty that we find a lack of demand for translations. So a translator will not make money from his translations. It's going to be very, very difficult because there is no ideology to sustain this sort of productivity.
Very interesting. Thank you. Mudashir, I know you want to speak. I haven't got to you. I don't know you were here when you were doing the introduction. So if you can please introduce yourself a little bit and then tell us how you entered this conversation. We would like to hear your opinion as well. You have to unmute now.
Yes. First of all, I'm so sorry for the delay. I was driving when they've been consented. So my name is Abdullah, a freelance translator working with international and national agency translators. Some works from Mamanda Adeeke, Helen Hagila's works, and others. So what I wanted to add regarding the literary translation challenges faced by translators is, especially from my angle of view, is sometimes, as Richard said, now it is history for a translator to say, I'll do it that is for the sake of God. Now it is the time for the translator to find out, to think outside the box, not even outside the box, but to think where there is no box. Let me tell you a scenario while I'm translating to Monday and God. I call it Gawana Abakamata Sarki as in Hausa. After she consented, I did the work. I sent it to Jalada Literary Magazine in Kenya. Then I started thinking, since I do it as a freelance, how can I get some money from the work I did to my language as Aditi? Since from them, I have been trying how works, like how Noble Americana and others could be translated into how, so that the market will be wider. Then the second scenario I face is, and raising some of the biggest challenging translators used to face the issue of marketing. How can you get money from what you translated or what you are translated? I have some solutions that I think they ought to be shared among these panels. The first solution is we have to think outside the box, or we have to think where there is no box. There is in all the Nigerian languages, Igbo, Yoruba, Fulde, Hausa, and others. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I proceed?
Hello, what did you say? I think his network is broken up. Okay, for all the rest of you can hear me. Let's
anybody with bad network can turn off their video, so just sound that's transmitted. That can help. If you know that you're using
if your network is bad, just put the video on.
Using MTN, turn off your video so we can hear you.
MTN. So I go get you. I go that. So thank you, everyone. Actually, I have had very interesting dimensions for this problem. There's a problem of marketing, there's a problem of publishing, there's a problem of even the passion to be able to write in the first place. Lale Konvabilola said he wants to have an opinion. Let me give him 2 minutes and then we'll get into. I really want to ask other panelists about their own personal experience with translation, what they find, what is positive about it, what they have learned in their own process of actually doing the work. But before then, let me give Lekon a few minutes to say something.
Good evening. My name is Adeleke. I'm so honored to be here, and I teach Yoruba, and I do my practices in Yoruba language and culture. So I have a background in computer science. I will start by saying what Adeeko said in 1972. I will say it in Yoruba. He said, "Asomoni shode, o lo sebi ode. Asomoni shobo, o lo si sajo obo. Awa asomoni shorin lo. O wa lo sajo, o wa pada bo. Awa nkun, tani kò mọ̀ pé ilé lọmọ ti mórúkọ ànú lọ." Which means a child is named Shode. It goes to Ebi. Ebi is where Osho resides, and he came back. A child is named Shobo. He traveled, he came back. We now name the child, this guy will go and will not return, showing law, and the guy goes and never returns, and we are now angry. What the name of the guy has already reflected. I mean, what the action of the guy has reflected in is in action. What I'm trying to say is that the problem of translation boils down to how the institution that is meant to help the language flourish, the side they take in it. For example, I heard someone said they don't reward reward translators, and when you have like Professor Adeeko said that it translated, and a publisher is trying to say, should I publish or not publish because it's not rewarding? This happens because we assume people don't read Yoruba, and people don't buy Yoruba. You go to bookstore, you see a pamphlet that is written 20 pages. You have them in hundreds, and you see it there because the person that's published let me just do it so that I can have something. Not that you really want to do it. I mean, the publishing angle now, because a publisher will literally not take it up to actually publish the book, because students is not meant for, I mean, it's not, you don't read those books in school. And where I'm not going is, if we can have an institution, because the government, I'm sorry, is not responsible. If we can have an institution like the Ake festival that can be solid, then can now hold the government accountable, I think we can begin to give that power to translator, and they can say, hey, I want to translate, because schools will be there, students will be there to patronize them, to patronize the publishers. And by so doing, we can have more people that will say, I want to translate, I want to translate. So, but the moment anyone can just do it out of passion, someone that is hungry cannot sit down and be translating because he's hungry. But if he knows that he's going to get something in return, yes, that means it will worth it in the long run, that, okay, all SS1 can take this, or GSS3 can take it, can form it. So I'm just saying.
Thank you. I thank you, Legon. I don't want to cut you short, but I also don't want you to go too long, because I want to pass this around a bit. But thank you so much. I understand what you're saying, but I also a slight disagreement about the motivation of anything, even writing, creative writing itself. There are people who are hungry and but still write creatively just because they feel the passion to write it. The publishing is a secondary element of it, which is important. The most important element is that you are interested in doing this work. The reason why people choose different work they do, some people choose to be teachers, some people choose to be, not all of them are motivated by finance, I think. Even though financing is important, of course, nobody wants to be hungry. But when we have money and we have the time to do it, then we decide this is the thing I'm passionate about. And the people who are able to do it even without the motivation of money, but still money is important, and it's something we have to talk about. I want to focus a little bit on the process of translating. I know many of us have done translations in the past. Many of us have written in languages other than English. One of the things I discovered while working on a short story by Chimamanda was how the Yoruba language not having gender, written the same way English does, made it important for me to always specify whenever the sentence in English was he said or she said. Made me have to specify, the man said, because otherwise two people are talking, one is a man, one is a woman. If you keep saying osokpe, osokpe, then you will confuse the reader who doesn't know who is O, because in Yoruba, O just means the person, which could be male or female. So what other challenges like this have you found, many of you who work in different language communities, that you would like to share with us as important discoveries as a translator that you find in the process of doing the work? Wanjeri, can I start with you?
It's interesting because I actually wanted to contribute to the earlier conversation. Could you allow me to do that?
Please do. Please do. Yes.
Yeah, so yeah. I completely agree that it is very much, it's seen very much to be a niche engagement that either you're doing out of passion or, and my feeling is that because what we do is that we are driven by passion, but we also publish online. So we don't have the limitation of physical books, because it is the same problem which we have with even the most popular author. You will always have dead stock because, physical books are difficult to get out into the world. Like there's an issue of marketing and So one thing that I think is that we need to consider is how do we transform, first of all, how do you make the work accessible? Number one, in digital age, the internet is a wonderful resource, but also how do we move beyond a story living online? I think our problem is that we're very insular. We're talking to each other. why are we not taking our stories to radio stations, TV stations, having the stories live in different ways? And also, why are we not talking to each other and having our stories flow in different ways? So that's kind of the thing that I was thinking, like, yes, we do have this passion project and it's taken us 4 years to translate it in 94 languages, but we have to look beyond our immediate audience. Because, like, for example, Swahili has 100 million speakers. How do we make sure we are creating a product that meets their different needs? Are we creating audiobooks, for example? We're not really doing that. That's not something we do a lot of, because I think there are more people understand a language and they can read it. And I think that's, we need to think beyond our immediate audiences, how our stories can translate and live in different spaces. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point to make. And to add to it,
there's a very vibrant conversation going on in the comments thread.
I am following that too. Please, if you can follow both conversations, it's interesting. Parallel conversations happening around this different part of the issue. Jerry, one thing I found as a linguist, which and somebody interested in technology, is something I found interesting what you mentioned about the web and other means of getting the message across. I mean, books are fine, but this is not the only way we pass around literary stuff now. The web is one part of it, but there's an angle of the web that interests me even more because of the long-term implications. So I'll be quick about this. When you think about Google Translate, for instance, and its terrible results for most African languages, most people blame Google for the problem. But the problem actually is caused by the fact that there's not enough content in those languages online, because what Google does basically is just go online and find data corpus that exists in those languages already, try to find a parallel translation for them, and then run them through machines. So the machines can then try to look at both parallels and find a way to understand the translation process. So if there's more Yoruba writing online that is accurate and more English parallel translations, or sometimes Google has to pay someone to translate it, and then they put it in the machine can then improve by itself over time. But the fact that we don't have more content in those languages online automatically eventually then affects the way those machines that are created improve in their own selves. So the irony is that we need more content online for the translation machines to work, and if translation machines work, then more people benefit with the languages online. So that's why it's helpful for platforms like yours, which is a web-based platform, to have content in those languages, because when the web crawlers are going around trying to find content in those languages, they find yours. So books are important for the same reasons. For instance, this is a Gojode book by Fagunwa, translated by Shoyinka. When you just type out everything in here and you type out the Yoruba version, just give it to a machine. And the machine just looks at both. And since it understands that both of them are translations of each other, at the end of the process, the machine can understand. If you ask it to translate one sentence, it might be able to understand it by just being able to compare the parallel translations of the two. So what we're doing is important in the long term, both in the short term process of helping people read and understand, but also in the long-term process of helping the language survive online and offline. I hope I haven't bored you too much.
No, and just to add a small thing to that, if you allow, and this is a challenge to everybody who's a publisher here. Make this work important. Make this work important. If it means setting aside money or time, make this work important. And I think what we haven't discussed also is the hierarchy of languages. That English has been made to be the most important thing, and because of capitalism, we want to put the work out there, but we haven't said that Kiswahili literature is important. It comes from us, and it goes to what you're saying, that the more volume of the work exists online, the more then it becomes normalized, essentially. That's it from me.
Yes, exactly. Also interesting that I mention this all the time, that when you go online, you search, you can find in like a few minutes many grants and translation opportunities for translating works from local languages into English. You'll find Penn, America, Penn, this and that will give you grants. So you'll find an important work in your language and come and put it into English. It's a good idea. It gives you money, gives satisfaction, but the language that benefits from it is not the language where the work was originally published. It's actually the language, the target language, English, where more people get to read it. But also where new things get to be invented in the process of writing it. When you look at this Shoyinka's Forest 1,000 Demons, the preface, he explains to you how he came about inventing new words to explain particular concept in Yoruba that did not exist before. At the end of the day, English is what gets more enriched. New words gets, brought into English. But when you're translating back into local languages, then you're actually doing the work of inventing and growing the languages into which you're translating. But that is where you don't find any grants. You go online, nobody is giving you money to translate something to Yoruba or to Swahili, which is not the fault of the Igbo people, because they're not the ones that benefit from it, but our institutions and the people around us who have the money but are not focusing on this. So it's up to us to highlight that issue. I want to go now again to the issue of the process. Mr. Ipadeola, what are the most interesting things or important things you find while you're working in translation from one language to the other? This is talking about craft this time. Mr. Ipadeola is not there, or is not on mute.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay, yes, please.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Go on. We can hear
Okay,
you.
so what have I found? What have I found? I am not trained in the linguistics like Kola Tubosun.
It doesn't really matter.
But over the course of the years, I've found a few things. And this is where I begin to agree with Wanjeri, for example. Yoruba is a tone-driven language.
Mm-hmm.
By that, I mean quite a lot depends on how a thing is because, for example, the Yoruba say "Pelela ko olabo."
Mm-hmm.
The syntax, which means sensitivity to tone, is what you have in Yoruba. Quite a lot gets lost in translation that way, I've found.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, going back to what Wanjeri said, I think one of the mistakes we're making, especially working from language, try to move too fast into text, whereas we can help the process by creating audiobooks from our works in Yoruba, for example. And I mean this very, very, very seriously. If we have a book, finished book like Professor Pamela Smith's book, we can help the process of absorption. We can help the process of getting the audience by actually putting this block in the way to assist consumers. If you have an audio book of your translation from Esquilos into Yoruba, I believe the reception, the final reception of the text when you do it will be much better than when you just produce the book in the book form. Because our people need to hear what you're talking about, not just read it. As a matter of fact, I think it was Kola Tubosun, again, who raised the question of why there are some books without all tone marks present and why there are some that have all the tone marks present. And why do we do that to Yoruba translations, for example? Why don't we have a standard form to guide us? A lot of people can read this work with or without tone marks anyway. It helps for us to agree to do it. These are the things I believe conversations like this help us to arrive at. Going forward, should we say that we will henceforth have all the tone marks present? Because I believe that all these little things, there are little hinges that swing huge doors eventually. Tones and syntax are one. The second thing I've found is that because there are far fewer words in Yoruba than we have in English, the same kind of problems that you have translating from French into English occur. The process of making meaning makes word order in your translation very, very important. You'll be making a huge mistake, and I think before so my English into Yoruba mistake quite a lot. That I can solve the problems by paying attention, because I was writing poetry. Attention is of the essence in poetry. I'm told that there are a lot of machines that can do these things more efficient, and I'm happy that that is the case. That you still train.
You're breaking up bad. If you can put off your video, I think it might help.
Okay, not badly.
Switch off your video and speak, it might be better. Although it's not bad, it's just that Tade is a very deliberate speaker. Tade they talk slow and steady. There's nothing wrong with what he's saying. That's what Tade talk.
Maybe it's my okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you well.
I switched off the video now. So we can do a lot to assist the process by paying attention to the multimedia functions, because really a book at the end of the day is a knowledge-bearing object. Does it mean that an audio book is any less a knowledge-bearing object? I don't think so. So we can help the process, I think, by paying attention to these little things. I know others have a lot to say.
I think it's true. Yeah, I think it's very interesting, this audiobook conversation. I think is actually quite important, because our cultures are originally oral, and if we think that translation has failed to sell because they are always in paper form, then it makes sense to think that audiobooks, where people get directly in words and in audio, might be a way to go about it. Again, audiobooks have to then deal with the problem of again, selling and buying, how many people want to put money in buying audiobooks, etc. Egosa would probably tell us more about how people will react to things like that as a means of passing literature across. But I think it's interesting. I think it might be a way to introduce translation to people, where they get to hear it literally directly from the mouth of a voiceover artist, who might then bring his own or her own creativity, so to speak, into it. Anybody else want to say something? Richard?
Can I follow up on what Mr. Ipadeola, because those are part of my remarks, of my own experiences with translation. Please. He's right in terms of the task of translation, of the difficulties, whatever language. And in going from a stress time language, which is English, to a tone time language, it's a completely different way. You are living in different universes. And also the critical terms. How do you say sonnet in Yoruba? Do you say a poem with 14 lines? That it doesn't make sense. How do you say meter? How do you translate rhyme? How do you translate rhyme, the things that deal with euphony in one language into another? So that's lineation. What I was doing a short piece on Cholera College. There are poems in the book. There are there's a reason he has 2 lines or rhyming couplets in his, but I can't do rhyming couplets in Yoruba, at least not at the level of my skill. Yeah. So I had to bring in, and you mentioned also the question of terms. The corollary in Yoruba, but it's also not that way. It's also the other way around too. The corollary in Yoruba concerns, for example, in Yoruba, poetry is mainly the genre, the type is by performance. The same lines, the same words could be performed as Ijala, could be performed as Eshaegungun, could be performed as Yerefa.
Right.
That distinction is not available for us if you are bringing chanted form in English to Yoruba. So one has to be very, very attentive to that. Then even beginning with the type itself, what is Itumo? I mean, the meaning of meaning in Yoruba is not the meaning of meaning in English. Or woman, perhaps the dean of Yoruba, proverb studies, said in Yoruba translation today, we call proverb owe. That's not true. They are not the same thing. Don't let me say that's not. But we have created that institution. So we have to be adjusting for substitutions. Let me show one thing. I have just one slide. If you let me show just one slide regarding that practical.
Yes, please.
Will you give me that? Can I share my screen now?
Okay, give me a second. You should be able to. Give me a second. Let me just check.
All right.
Okay, give me a second.
Allow multiple people to share screens.
Yeah.
How do I find that thing?
And on the green band on top. On the green band on top of your.
Okay.
Click on it.
The security participant
drop down menu.
Share.
Allow all.
Using a
allow multiple people.
Advanced. I'm in the map. Hold on a second.
It's going to be at the bottom.
So I can see the bar, but I see mute.
The drop down menu.
Participants.
Drop down menu in share screen.
The drop down.
Share screen.
There should be a drop down menu in share screen. Then allow multiple users. Allow multiple participants.
Don't give me.
Are you using Apple or Windows?
Let me stop sharing my own first. Let me just stop sharing first. I think that should.
Okay, then do it now. Is this Apple or Windows?
This is Apple.
Apple or Apple?
Multiple can share. Yeah, it's an Apple. Yes. You should be able to share now.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, I can now.
Good.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Huh? Okay.
Yes.
This is from a Yoruba dictionary. Aborisha. Okay. Someone who worships something that is not God. Look at Orisha.
Okay.
What we love with the utmost fashion, something that is not God. Not God.
This is a very Christian definition.
Very Christian definition of Orisha, Olorun and all. So now when you see this, this is the only, and this is serious, this is the only Yoruba to Yoruba dictionary, the only one, Isaac Delano, 1958.
Oh, the Baba Delano's one. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the only, I took all this from the only Yoruba to Yoruba dictionary. And this Yoruba to Yoruba dictionary has already translated from Christian English, Christianized English to Yoruba. So now the difficulty, and I just gave this as an example of the kind of balances that one has to do to translate. Be attentive to, in a way that will be attentive to the society or to the language in which one is translating into. This is clearly Christian. It's also Yoruba at the same time. My problem is not with Christianity. My problem is not paying attention to the Yoruba part of the translation. And the example of poetry I was given, if you look at the third stanza on the right, that's the original. There are only 2 lines from Oshofisan, but I have to make it 3 in translation because there is to follow Oshofisan's translation here may not be quite would not reflect quite well what I believe what I'm doing, and a lot of things that you just have to change. So, and I've stopped sharing now. That was in response to your question of difficulties one face as a translator. It's a huge, but one has to be very, very sensitive to the language into which one is putting things, or else one will end up creating bad faith work that will not help. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's very important. I think one of the things I was thinking about while I was translating that Chimamanda's work called The Shivering, that's what she called it. She called it. The story, for many of you who know, involved somebody who is homosexual, but who didn't know for a while or something, right?
Homosexual and Christian.
But in translating that to Yoruba, one of the things I found besides the gender issue is that I have no word to say homosexual orientation in Yoruba. The only word I remember, adofuro, is a pejorative and is describing an act rather than an orientation. And it's not what you want to use in a story where there is no judgment implied in identifying or recognizing the orientation of the hero. So again, in the process, I get to deal with my own problem of being able to transmit that reality without including judgment in it. And so in the process, something else happens. You create something new for somebody who reads it, gets to read Yoruba in a way that has not been used before to describe something that traditionally, so to say, traditionally in Yoruba would have involved judgment. So it shows you that the translation is not just the act of moving things from one to another. Sometimes it involves you also consciously shaping the language and helping it deal with things that it probably otherwise wouldn't have been able to deal with. I found it very interesting. Richard, you say you want to read something for us from your translation of the work. It would be interesting to hear you and any other thing you want to say about the process of doing so.
Okay, yeah. So what I'd like to add is that sometimes this language is particularly Nigerian Pidgin. There's this difficulty in terms of a language that is always changing, that is always evolving each and every day, and there's no standardized version. We have this problem in Pidgin, and we have this problem in Hausa as well. Because in the case of Hausa, there's a Kano Hausa, which is the general Hausa. But all the other speakers of Hausa, they've not agreed about that. And they are very, very passionate in pushing versions of the Hausa language. So it's not like Igbo where there's a central Igbo and everybody's quarreling about it.
Even Igbo has Igbo is not a kumbaya society either.
If it's either if you don't speak Kano, nobody's even making an effort to speak it. So but I would like to read from my translation. There was something we did. It's Makamats of Al-Hariri. He lived in the
I have that book.
Yeah, okay, so so I was part of it. So I did a translation here into Pidgin English. Now the Makamets themselves were written, the Al-Hariri of Basra, he lived in 1122, and he was a Basran, and he wrote this initially in Arabic. So there were 50 short stories. You could call them short stories or Makamats precisely. So it's a mixture of verse and poetry. And Professor Michael Cooperson at the University of UCLA, he decided that he's going to come up with a new version of Al-Hariri's Makamats, which he called Impostures. However, what he did, which was groundbreaking, was that it was translated into 50 different Englishes. So you've got Australian type of Australian English, all sorts of varieties of English. So one of those Englishes was Niger language, which I translated. So I wanted as much as possible to capture.
What page is that?
It's on page, which is one of those jokes. It's on page 419.
Okay, appropriately placed.
I couldn't believe this. It's on page 419. So it's an inside joke for the Nigerians. So here, in this one, the central character, the Saruji, who is Abu Zaid, is trying to con a judge. And all these stories, they are narrated by a central narrator who narrates the story more or less about his life. Okay, so here goes. I'll just read the first two paragraphs. Nahari Suhaman nakos this story. People wey sabi talk say to Johnny na mirror where they show man things wey go totori body. As such, I take the matter to heart just the travel. I don't cross Sahara Desert where water no dey. Sam, enter place where you go fear. For sake of say, I want see all the totori thing for this world. Of the many things where my eye don't see, none of them confuse me past waiting happen when I go see Oga George for Ramla. Oga George for Ramla get money well, and a very big man he be. One day, I dey for in court and then can't charge one old man wey wear old and tear cloth, and one fine sissy wey wear good clothes wey don't old small for body. The old man once started blow grammar, waiting bring them come, but the sissy no even let him talk. She just shut up him like that. Now the woman can't lift her handkerchief from her mouth, can't start to talk as woman we no get shame and we know they fear anybody face. Oga George for Ramla, now you biko. I say Oga George for Ramla, now you biko. Now if you give me better or refuse me better, my life don't spoil, pata pata, for sake of my husband. Alaji go round Kaaba every time, but you know go come back. No, 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 no. After Mecca, he go visit Prophet too. Can't join another small visit for Mecca again. Now who send them? Since he marry me, I know they see him Sam. If he no go pull with me, I beg make he free me. Before I become a shower, I say make he free me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've had this book, but I didn't even know your insight.
Why is your translation so unsexy? You remove all the explicitness. Man. The explicitness is all gone.
Oh dear.
And Pidgin loves explicitness.
Yes, so
use the words that you're afraid to use. Use them. Those words that feel guttural, that feel dirty. Those are the words that person was begging for. That word that you don't want to use.
You cleaned the book. You cleaned it completely. I'm sorry.
Because
I just have to note that.
I think it speaks to what I was going to talk about, Kola, which is about the distance that these colonial languages give us. There was a time I was speaking to, you know, I also teach I teach at the Chimamanda Adichie annual workshop.
Yeah.
And you could see the C word, the F word. We could drop them off. We could just throw them about in language. We couldn't get how painful. We could rap hip hop and say nigga this, nigga that. We couldn't really get how painful they were until I told them to use the Pidgin word for vagina. Nobody in the class could say it out loud. I said it proudly. The word that everybody's not allowed to say. You know, guys. And I told them that power, that word that your own curse words have. The curse words that are forbidden in your own language, the power they have. And that's why I'm also thinking that maybe translation it has to go back to the forms in which stories were meant to be told in, not read as scribbles on a page. This great invention of humankind, which is we're looking at symbols, but we're hearing just scribble. It's spoken. Maybe the power of what Richard did is what makes us so have the argument. Prof is speaking, I'm speaking, and we're teasing. But it is so powerful in that maybe the battle now shifts to oral. Just like the way people say that television killed radio. No, television just moved radio time to driving in go slow. It didn't kill it. Television didn't kill cinemas. Television moved cinemas to a groove and a date with your girlfriend or your loved one. It made it a special event. Maybe these written languages that have invaded our space and pushed our languages to the side, maybe they've made our languages what they were, oral. Maybe we need to have that battle. Exactly. Then from there, we hope that we plant these seeds for future generations, those younger than us, those born into a place where they can think of those languages as proud, those who do not become like consequences of the damage done like me. They can now say, okay, maybe my kids, like I married a Benin woman and I make sure that my kids speak Benin and I can't speak it, but I make sure that she speaks it to them. And I hope that eventually they can read it and they can write it. Maybe that's where the battle shifts. Maybe it is oral forms. I can imagine, like I told you before, the joke we always crack about me and poetry, when I told you I'm dyslexic when it comes to poetry. I can't see meter, I do not know why the sentence is being broken in the middle, continue on the other line. But when I hear it, when it is read to me, Richard always teases me about my dyslexia and poetry. When it is read to me, I see it jump out, I get it, but I'm just illiterate when it comes to poetry. So maybe it is oral form, maybe it's the audiobook. Maybe that's where the
That's a good point.
Mr. Tubosun, let me make one point. Again, as a professor of English, as someone who teaches literature, I violently disagree with that. There is nothing peculiar about orality in African languages. There is nothing peculiar about it. It's an intellectual thing we put out there.
Not what I was saying.
I'm saying it has lasted half a century.
Oh, not what I was saying.
We need to. There is orality has its own position. Literacy has its own position. There is nothing particularly oral. To go back to orality does not mean that we are returning to something. We are inventing it. Again, I do not study orality.
No, not what I was saying. I apologize if I
I'm a
wasn't
scholar
clear.
of orality. I study it, but a lot of people, many scholars now turn orality into a fetish of Africanness, which I cannot completely agree.
No,
Because
I suspect what he's saying is different.
Not what I was saying.
Wait.
Look,
I want him to finish. Let him, then he can clarify what he's saying. What I hear from it is that, you know, there are a number of ways in which what we have written down, you know, takes away from the beauty of the work, and not saying that it doesn't have its own place, but that the work comes alive better when we read it out. For instance, I was noticing something when Richard was reading. The word ashawo, he read it as ashawo, but it's written there as A-S-H-E-W-O, ashewo, which we would call ashewo, which doesn't really matter in the end. The most important thing is that the sense is conveyed, and whoever reads it gets a different impression than whoever is listening to it being performed and being read aloud. Plays, for instance, are published as books, but they're not worth anything as books until you see them on the stage. Doesn't mean that the publishing doesn't have its own space, but that the orality, the performance itself, sometimes carries, you know, the full value of the work rather than just what's written.
Look,
That's what I get from it anyway.
I get that. But Shakespeare did not get down to us as a performer. Without the text, there'll be no Shakespeare.
But he got to people.
Shakespeare,
but he got to people around him.
No, Mr. Tubosun.
And he was made. It was called a bard.
Was performed on
because
stage.
of the people who listened and saw his work.
In the Renaissance, Shakespeare was performed.
Oh, really?
Shakespeare was like Ogunde. Shakespeare was not an author.
Yes.
But he had scripts.
Yes.
It's the scripts that get down.
Yes.
Nobody had a record of Shakespeare's performance on stage in England. So that's why I'm saying that for me, I worship writing. I encourage that we worship it. Without writing, we will not be here on this platform. Without writing, if we had writing, it would have been far, far better for us on the continent than the way it is now. I'm alone in that, and I tend to defend it everywhere I go. I mean,
Gusa is a publisher. I don't think he would say people shouldn't publish anything. He's a publisher. Another is a publisher. I don't think he's arguing against writing at all. Gusa, speak for yourself.
I'm a publisher, and thank you, exactly.
That's his book.
The point I always make, the point I always make, and there's something I always say, which is that one of the greatest inventions of us as a people, as a species, is the ability to bypass this mechanism that took us out, this throat and mouth thing, for us to be able to rewire our brains to see. There's something I say about, have you ever seen somebody who learned how to read as an adult read? They visibly sound out was reading them on the page. But children see those signs and voice them. It's a different thing completely. It is my awe of writing as a tool, and I love it. But I also still remember that all writing, the languages I speak are English and Pidgin. All writing to me ends up being the way it sounds to me. If I can get the sound from it, I'm happy with it. If I can't, I'm happy with somebody reading it to me. That's what I was speaking. And I was trying to say that if we're having the issues with the smaller languages being difficult to put on the curriculum, being difficult to get written versions of, being difficult to hit a critical mass of people literate in those languages, then maybe translation becomes something that is performed. Then eventually it triggers that thing we want to trigger by having people say, I want to see it written down. That's what I was speaking to. I mean, I've never believed that. To me, I still believe that English is a tonal or whatever. I don't know the details of it, but I believe that I was speaking English to an American and he couldn't hear a thing that I was saying because I pronounced embarrassed, or embarrassed, whatever. I said, sorry. I was like, embarrassed now. He said, embarrassed. I said, oh, sorry. Yes, that word. And I believe that writing a language freezes the tone of a language. I believe that the effect on our languages will be seen maybe in a few hundred years. It changes languages because eventually the language the written form travels beyond the native speakers, and its pronunciations are changed, consonant shifts occur. I've always believed that, but I mean, all of writing, not my point about the difference. I was trying to speak towards something practical about how do we make translation something that people that if I hear it, I'm blown away. That's just for me personally, not as a, what I was trying to say. I love me writing. That's what I do for a living. Always loved it.
Okay. Let me move the conversation forward slightly.
The chat don't reach 12 speeches. Yes, I agree.
Probably having their own argument in the chat. Let me ask a question about
people arguing in the corner.
I was reading this. I was reading this.
You should save the chat,
monograph.
Kola, save the chat.
I will do that before we cancel, so that we can see. This speech, university talk by Professor Adeeko in 1974, called "Not Vernaculars but Languages." I read this yesterday, and it was making a case I had actually been thinking about myself since I used to teach high school English. That we think of a literature in our schools as only literature in English. Actually, the subject is called literature in English, which I have always wondered why we have literature in English. This is part of the problem. When we think of literature, we think of Oshoyinka Achebe, J.P. Clark, Shakespeare, etc., etc. African literature, modern African literature, but all of them is in English. And so we condition children to think of literature only as things published in English. And this is also part of why when we want to think of salvaging the situation, we also have to go deep into the policy and people who made the decision that when people go through school, they're not able to handle literature written in other languages. Translation is a way to help make that happen, because if you subscribe a book in, a Fagunwa book, for instance, you assume only people who can read Yoruba can understand it. But even people who speak Yoruba today may not even be able to understand everything Fagunwa wrote. So translation is helpful and important. And in the process of understanding it, children also, students appreciate the benefit of translation. Even if they don't understand everything he said, they can understand what the author is trying to do, and the translator, and a couple of other things that they may not be able to get if they read only the English version, or if they only read people who wrote in English. I don't know how we can solve that. I hope maybe one of us becomes a minister for education someday. It might be something to put in mind. That when literature is just literature, then you open their mind. This vista is wide. But when it's just literature in English, you have limited us to only, literature published in Queen's English and Nigerian English and Pidgin English. By the way, I also noticed, I was mentioning, yes, please, Manjeri. Go on.
The more we're discussing this, I realized that when you talk about translation, we're talking about a text moving from one language to another. What is a primary text? Because my feeling is translation is important because then we take an idea in another language and present it in a different language. And, then it wrestles with whatever needs to be and exists in its own way. And I wonder if we also need to talk about just having stories in our own indigenous languages. That translation is great because it's a bridge, but also just having what purely exists in its own language, which is what Professor Ngoge has been pushing for. So I wonder if that is part of the conversation we're having today, because I think we're arguing about translation.
It is now.
Yeah, so I don't know what people think about that.
Yes, please. Anyone who wants to take what she said. I think it's important.
Yeah, I remember, I think Mudassir mentioned something about sci-fi in Hausa, which ties in with what
Mudassir, please speak, or your hand. Sorry, Richard. Mudassir has his hand raised up. If you want to speak, please speak. You don't have to wait for me to call you. But go on, Richard.
No, Mudassir had mentioned something about a project where he's working on sci-fi written in Hausa. So it ties in with what Wanjeri has said in the sense of translation being a second step. Perhaps the first step is to actually write in these languages. So it would be nice to know more about Mudassir's project of sci-fi written in Hausa, what it's about, so that, translation becomes the inevitable second step.
Yeah. Mudassir, please, we'd like to hear what you have to say about this. I hope he's here.
Yeah. First of all,
he's probably gone.
All right.
Okay, he's here.
He's speaking now.
Yeah.
Unmute yourself.
The edition of this project, my channel. Yeah, I did.
Go on.
Yeah. The edition of this project of sci-fi in Hausa community existence since I was young, because I'm a fan of sci-fi movies, reading books by Isaac Asimov, Douglas Adams, and others. But one thing is the future. I wanted to see Africans. That is, how can I see Africa in the next 200 years or 300 years in the future, as has been doing by sci-fi writers from your Western world. So the challenges I've been facing, I'm still facing, is how do I perceive the future I wanted to see Africa in the next 100 to 200 years. And I've been trying to find out how can I perceive that. Due to subconscious bias, I have been finding myself in like all the books I read from sci-fi are written by your Western writers like Isaac Asimov and others. All the movies I have been watching were produced by your Western producers and directors. So this is the biggest challenge, but thank God, there are many people working on that. With me, there's a book written called African Futures, Thinking About the Future in World and Image, edited by Lynn Hendrich Selene and Sin Otole. The book is highlight and solve all this kind of unanswered question I have been facing and asking myself regarding how do I perceive the future of Africa and others. What I wanted to say is there are several terms that I have been trying how to perceive them. How do I translate them into my native Hausa languages? But still, I didn't. So I want to see if we have scholars here. Do they face such kind of challenges while translating some scientific and technological terms into their native languages? If they did, how they did it, so that I can find out my way from their ways. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone wants to take that? I missed a part of it, but I'm sure you guys heard it.
I don't translate scientific terms. I don't do science. I do literary criticism.
Yeah.
I also do cultural philosophy, but the same issues occur there too. Something as basic as metaphor. There is no word for metaphor in Yoruba.
Mm-hmm.
There is none. But there have been substitutes. So we create, scholars use what they call afiwe elelo, comparison that is twined, an entwined comparison, which in itself is a bad translation, but it works. Because when something is compared in Yoruba, it also means it's already entwined. So to say entwined comparison is actually a repetition that's not necessary. As far as I'm concerned, I would rather just say comparison. But they said we must separate it from simile. So for simile, they will say straight comparison. But again, that's still from English. Because to weigh in Yoruba means to wrap, to entwine. So to fold into one another. The same with what about meaning, which is basic in all language studies? Tumor. How do you render meaning in Yoruba? They call it itumo, which is the unraveling of knowledge, which makes no sense in English. So when you move when you move meaning in English to Yoruba and you render it as itumo, it doesn't make sense. Because how do you unravel meaning? Or do you ravel meaning? Or something like that. So these are fundamental things that translations, this is where I learned that. This is where I conclude. Whatever the scholarly community, the community of users arrive on or arrive at, and we choose to follow as a community, and we create that community of meaning, then that's what we follow. Because you cannot be Catholic. I mean, you have to be Catholic, you have to be universal in these issues. But if one is parochial then it will lead to bad things. As Christians now tell us, African languages are not languages of anointing. That they say that. I've heard it. I've heard it from preachers. They say Yoruba is the language of anointing because of their approach to language, to meaning. So, so Mr. Mudassir, that's what I would recommend: a community of users. The community of users create standards and follow it, and that is the same. And my reading of history of science, that's what they do even in scientific studies. They create standards and then they agree to follow it.
If I may add, I think that maybe in response to Mudassir, it's also important that a translator should approach his text with confidence. If something does not exist, invent it.
Yep.
Put it out there.
Yep.
That's because the whole point, which is one of these things, all right, when I am acting as a translator, I am filtering these languages through the prism of my own life. And my life is singular and unique. So words that don't exist or that don't have meanings, I have anointed myself as the person who gives words to them. So,
it's true. It's true.
It's very, very crucial because you are not translating.
It's important to.
You are not transliterating, you are translating. And it's an imperfect process. So basically for me, what is the thing with translation is that you are immersed in two different cultures, and the way that a phrase falls in one culture, you are trying to get across the way it falls into another culture. Not necessarily about words from there to there and finding parallels. No, you are trying to create a sense of what language has done in one culture, language into another culture, and this cannot be done without confidence.
I agree with you, Richard, and I've experienced it myself. From how I feel about translating a sentence maybe 10 years ago is not the same way I feel now. Now I feel whatever I translate is what I believe it to be true. Let people who want to argue with it when it's published, and you can say a sentence in English and 10 people can say it in different ways in Yoruba. As long as they can communicate that sense properly to the people they're speaking to, it's as valid as anyone else's.
Mr.
And then, let many, yes, please. Let many flowers bloom. Mr. Ipadeola, please speak. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, so
yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you can see.
I think Mudassir's predicament or conundrum is interesting, but history offers us some way to view where the solution may lie. A lot of the work in science was done in Europe, but we still use Arabic for mathematics. I mean, it will be impractical on so many levels to use Roman numerals to do computing. In the future, we suspect that the language of mathematics will come from Africa, but we are not there yet. So what I would suggest is that we continue the work and hope that this community that Professor Adeeko is talking about would, this critical mass, to use the language of physicists, would emerge and then change the dynamics. Something nasty is happening in Europe. Whether you are studying at Max Planck or in Portugal, you must now learn English. And I'm talking about people who are studying pure sciences, people who are studying engineering, physics. You must now learn. And I believe that it's a narrowing, it's homogenizing in a very, very dangerous way. Because some of the discoveries that were made, for example, in the treatment of HIV, came from African researchers who were never credited, who brought a way of looking at structure and functions from here to Ann Harbor and then made it. I'm talking from personal experience now. My uncle used to work in a laboratory in Stanford, and his supervisor was William Shockley. And William Shockley was racist in the extreme. And he couldn't believe that his brightest student was from whose voice?
Mudassir, I'm going to meet you.
Okay.
I've muted him. It's Mudassir. Yeah.
So we have these situations where the thinking that produces the breakthrough is coming from a place you didn't expect. Do you want to risk not having a solution simply because that solution is coming from Oman? Do you want to risk not having an answer simply because it is coming from Uganda? Let us continue the work, and I believe in the future. I'm aware of scientists working on this problem that Mudassir is talking about. And they say the future of AI is in tones. I want to believe this. So anyway, that's my contribution to the discussion.
I mean, I often wonder if Albert Einstein hadn't moved to the US because he was being persecuted from Nazi Germany, all his work would have remained in German, and they wouldn't have become any less important just because they were written or thought about or expressed in German. You know, so the language itself is not the most important thing, but the ideas that are created in them. And I really believe that it's important for us to put many of our work in our own languages, more than just being able to communicate with people, also be able to develop those.
There was a time when Latin served that function, isn't it? When people felt that you couldn't study science in India if you did not learn Latin or Greek. There was a time even in medical school, while we were in medical school, when we were forced, I think it was my set by 93, 94, that they stopped it and started teaching us the English versions or the plain versions of the words for the different bones. Initially, we were forced to speak those bones, to speak the names of those bones. We were forced to speak them in the Greek form. So you were talking about tibialis and anterior tibialis frontalis or things like that. Eventually, they tell you, you know what, don't. It's the frontal leg bone. And it helped us because it made more people understand that while people fear or think that there's a science, that at the end, science is basically universal. It's even with math, Niels Bohr wrote in Danish. Hans Mendel, father of genetics, wrote in German.
Sorry.
But yeah, I see him. Welcome back. Yeah, I was talking about the universality of science. I was talking about the universality of science and how the battles that we think are being fought are constantly shifting. But it comes down to how do we preserve what our people left us? How do we make sure it doesn't die? By whatever means necessary. How do we see these battles being fought from places across the Niger Delta where there was a multiplicity of languages, where the damage was incalculable, to small communities of a few thousand people, to places where there was a mass of people where those languages survive, and how we are fighting two battles, like the Benin's being in the Western region and considering that they were losing. The battles are many and they are constantly shifting. And the solutions are also different. And how do we say, okay, for translation, do we consider that, yes, that to fight a battle on different platforms, especially for languages like mine, then get our people to remember how beautiful it sounds again and how they want to go back and read it. That's what I was speaking from. And how, but the idea in the, that's what I was speaking to.
It's actually, one thing also, let me just throw a little wrench in this conversation also. Something I occurred to me one time when I was thinking about robots and robots taking over the world, and the possibility that one day Oyimbos would control everything with the language. Somebody is speaking, I don't know whose thing is giving us the sound. So at least for a little moment,
she's shouting at my,
my
kids and my mama.
Okay, so for at least one little moment, I was happy that all the technology, all the machines in the world don't understand Yoruba for one little moment. Because I assume that, you know, sometimes obsessed with sci-fi ideas of the world run by machines, you are for a little moment happy that somebody who is trying to come to kill you, which is what most sci-fi stories tell you, doesn't always understand everything you say. So you can speak to your mom, while the machine is standing by, and they don't understand everything you're saying because you're speaking a different language. So I guess on the one hand, while translation is good and interesting, at least for literary or contrarian purposes, I sometimes indulge myself in the appreciation of the fact that sometimes machines can't do everything. And that maybe it's a good thing that we have so many languages in the world and that we don't always at every time understand what everybody is saying. I want everybody to give me
like the Navajo code speakers in World War II. The Navajo code speakers that the American Army used.
Exactly, for the Second World War. So, so it's a very interesting dimension. But literature is important, but so also is this multiplicity and this occasional inability, what I call lingua francas, inability to always understand each other at every time. If everybody wants to give us final words, I want to round off so we don't.
Mr. Tubosun, I can say something finally. This will be my last word.
Yes, please.
Let us see translation as working with thought structure. A language is not just alphabet. It's not just a sound system. Language is a way of changing, of moving world. How do you know what I'm saying now? The only way you understand what I'm saying now is because I'm speaking, because I'm using a language to understand. That's what I saw Ngugi arguing in 1977. Not just for the value of Kikuyu, of his native language, or some African, but as a massive structure of thought, something that is lost. It is totally lost. I'm imagining the way of thinking, the way of acting in the world that is not accessible to me anymore because it's been lost completely. That's what attracts me to translation every time. To gain access to another structure of being, another in the world. That's what I look for. Thanks.
Hello
Thank
there.
you very much.
I want to say,
Aisha.
I want to say a word or two. I've been wanting to talk about this nonverbal translation. Translation. In translation, there is no way one can escape nonverbal translation. Just like he's talking about Yoruba being a tone language and so on. So we have so many nonverbal ingredients in translation that just like the normal human interaction that we cannot escape. We have, for instance, you may have gestures in Yoruba, which is not found in Hausa or English or any other language. So when you come across those kinds of, so how do you tackle it? How do you do it? So I had wanted to discuss about it, but time is not on our side and it's very, very quick.
Take a minute or two and speak to whatever it is you want. I said take a minute or two and let's hear from you. We haven't heard from you a lot.
Okay, like I said, we can find gestures in one language and absent in other languages, and also you can have the same gesture but having different meanings in languages. For instance, I have an excerpt from the story of an African farm by Oliver. Let me just go straight to the nonverbal cues there. He said he folded his arms and began to cry, not aloud. He sobbed without making any sound, and his tears left scotch marks. So when we want to translate this text into Hausa, you find out that there is no word for sobbing in Hausa. Sobbing. How do you translate this sobbed into Hausa? So, and also this, he folded his arms. Unfolding have different meaning in Hausa and in English and English language. And also this scotched marks, we don't have these scotch marks, so you translate it as, you have to introduce some techniques such as maybe amplifications and so on. Like this scotch marks, you can just translate it as shatter Hawaiiansa, a puskarsa. And here scotch marks, we don't even talk about any on the face or anything, but if you want to translate it into Hausa, you have to add more. You have to add more words. You have to amplify the meaning so that you can accommodate and the nonverbal cues there. So we have so many instances of this nonverbal translation in literary text, and they are very, very important. And translators seem to ignore it in translation. And so there is no way the text will be meaningful without this nonverbal translation. So even though a translator have a knowledge about cultures, so you have to know the context of these nonverbal cues. So you have to understand the cultures, and also you have to go down to understanding the context. So at times you may not have you may not have them. So like I could remember, was it Richard or somebody that was saying that as a translator you just have to learn to create things. Sometimes you just have to make them up there. You have to create them. So that's, let me give others a chance to say something.
Kola has disappeared.
Looks like Kola is gone. Kola is gone. Our host is gone. But the ghost has the host now. So
okay, you be the
Kola
host.
is using MTN. I'm not the guy. Everybody mute.
you're the host now.
Oh, Kola isn't back, true.
And
I
don't
by
say
accident.
that.
I don't know. I became
really
host.
appreciate
Kola,
that.
welcome.
He's back.
Kola is not here.
Kola, please save the chat now. Save the chat because the chat is actually quite interesting. Please save it.
I will save the
We'll
chat
lose
and
contact
send
with you
it to
again.
LABAF. Sorry for my internet going off and on.
Is it
Thank you
MTN?
everyone for your time. It's MTN, yes, as you can tell.
I hope they're not sponsoring the show. I've just caused problem.
I don't know. They don't give me anything else. So everyone, I really want to thank you. Sorry for the internet off and on. Thank you for a wonderful conversation. I always love these conversations. This is something we talk about over beer every time. We fight, we argue, we talk, we learn a thing or two. But I'm really glad that the conversation keeps happening and keeps going forward. I'm happy that there are more people engaged with this in many ways. Richard, I didn't even know your work is in this book. I got it just a few days ago, and now I have something to read for the next couple of days.
Okay.
So thank you, Egosa. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Anjeri. Thank you, Mudassir, Professor Adeleke, Mr. Ipadeola, Aisha, and everyone else who participated, Familoni and the rest of them. I appreciate you. Thank you, Jaman, for organizing this. And we hope when COVID is over, we gather and talk some more about this and share some more wine and literature. Until next time, I'm going to hang out and go and do something to my internet, maybe drop it in a bottle of hot water.
Switch from MTN.
Don't talk about AI. They are listening.
Double.
Okay. Bye-bye. See you, Anjuma. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye, Jerry. Bye-bye, Tade. It was a pleasure. Bye. Yeah, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I shall save the video and send it to German and the chat as well. Bye-bye, Richard. See you guys later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.